We're on the main street of a city that at the time of the disciples was called Aphrodisias. Now, none of the disciples came here that we know of. So I can't tell you any stories about them, but we do know that in the first, second century, there was a community of people who followed Jesus. Disciples, Christians, they were beginning to be called. And they were here. It's an amazing city, really. Take a look at the gate. This is called a tetrapolon. It's a formal gate into the area of Aphrodite. Just look at the beauty. Notice the variety of columns, flutes, spiral flutes, some that are just smooth, the different capitals at the top, the different carvings on the gate itself. And you begin to see that this was not only a wealthy place and a powerful place, but this was also a city of artistry and of art. But we've come here for a different reason. This helps me to appreciate the power of the city, but there's something here that helps us to appreciate how the early disciples could communicate the message that Jesus had entrusted to them or to their teachers. So come with me. This is why we're here, even though none of the disciples were. We need to see how they fit into this part of their world. What's interesting, by the way, is that the Jewish disciples would have had some experience with this because there were two arenas, at least, in Israel. One's in Caesarea. It's huge. It's much bigger than this. Apparently, Herod built it. Part of it's washed away. It's beautiful today with the Mediterranean waves washing up on it. That was huge. And then there's one, if you remember, in Scythopolis, where much smaller, but where Jesus walked every time he walked to Jerusalem, he would have walked right by there. There was another there. So they did have some sense of what this part of their world was, although, of course, there are none in Galilee where Jesus taught his disciples. This is a Greek stadium, but it was used at the Roman period when the disciples were in the area, or the disciples of the disciples. It seated about 30 to 40,000, has 24 rows of seats. You can see the entrances for the athletes on both ends. And notice the royal box, the place where the king or the governor or the ruler of the games would sit. Pretty impressive. Picture it in your mind with 40,000 fans screaming for whatever's going on down here. The question I have for me today is this. When Jesus called disciples, they understood that the model for the intensity, the passion, the focus that disciples had, the model was Elijah. But how do you say that to a culture that never heard of Elijah? Well, I'd like to suggest that those early disciples drew their image, their picture, their metaphor for their new disciples who were not Jews out of what they knew about games and athletics. The point of sport was not simply the spectacle for the spectators or to determine who was the best at something. The purpose of sport was to declare God, their gods, to be great and awesome. When the emperor began to be thought of as God, he used the games to say to the world, I'm God, and I'm king of the universe. And the athletes ran, in a sense, to say to the world, we declare that he is Lord and God. They were religious. So in a sense, it's amazing that the gospel writers, the Bible writers, would use that imagery because of the pagan religion. On the other hand, because people knew the games, it communicated powerfully. Let me show you what I mean. Olympic Games, especially those designed to declare to the world that Caesar was God, Domitian, let's say, started with the emperor's entrance. So picture 40,000 fans, and coming through that opening, the emperor. Maybe he's wearing the uniform of a Roman soldier, gleaming in the sun, the red crest back on his head, maybe walking, maybe on a white horse. Or maybe he chose the robe of a Greek god, Zeus, or the Roman Jupiter, that sash across the chest to say, I'm the king.